So welcome to another Collect Emulator Void video. This is going to be the last one in Generation 5, and of course it's about the Sony Playstation. Now, basically, I'm going to start off with some backstory. Now, most people know the origin story of the PlayStation. It was effectively a giant fuck you to Nintendo. That's what it was. Sony was so annoyed by the whole Super Nintendo CD add-on debacle, and basically to be fair, Sony had actually invested quite a lot of R&D budget and time into the Nintendo PlayStation as was. So if you're Johnny Sony, you've invested millions into the R&D for a console that, because some other companies just suddenly decided they want to pull out, can't come out. Not to say that Nintendo hadn't invested anything in it, but the Nintendo hardware that was in the original Sony PlayStation, or Nintendo PlayStation rather, was basically just Super Nintendo hardware anyway. I mean, that bit had all been done. So as far as actual R&D was concerned, Sony did the lion's share of the work. So quite rightly they thought, well, what do we do with that? Now, what they didn't do was just repackage it, which some people seem to think that's what happened. Is, oh, well, they just took the Nintendo bits off and brought out the CD bit. Well, no, that wouldn't really work. And what was it, about a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, when somebody discovered one of these original prototype Nintendo PlayStations, I think there was at least 4 or 5 different and proper gaming news sites on the internet that said, you know, they were of the reasoning that, well, will it play PlayStation games? Well, of course it wouldn't. That's just absolute lunacy. I think one of them was Kotaku as well. It's like, Christ, you've been doing this a long time, you should know how this works by now. There is no way it would play PlayStation games. That's just stupid. I'm getting off track. Anyway, so yeah, obviously PlayStation formed the Nintendo PlayStation into what would ultimately become the Sony PlayStation. So yeah, it was basically fingers up to Nintendo. That was how this console came about. If it wasn't for that deal and the fact that Sony just wanted to, you know, PlayStation probably wouldn't even be a thing. There would be no PlayStation console. So, you know, Nintendo, it's your fault. You created your own competitor. Bad luck. Now, so the hardware, first of all. Now, there are some people, some websites rather, seem to claim that there are 30 variants of the PlayStation 1. Now, unless they're talking different colours, I can get nowhere near that number, no matter how much I try. As far as I'm aware, and as far as I've ever seen, there are 3 variants of the large console, which are the original one. And you can tell this by looking at the top, where it will actually say power and eject on the main buttons, and if you turn it around the back, you will find that there is 3 RCA connectors. So that's the red, the yellow, and the white. There is a AV out. There is a serial port and a parallel port, and there's a mini jack thing for the RF connector that it came bundled with. So that's the first model. I'm going to call that Model A. That's going to be Model A. Now, this is the one that I've got, because I got my PlayStation quite early on. I've got 2 of these, in fact, because I found another one recently in a charity shop. So if you've seen my recent pickups video, it was one of these models that I found. which is why I thought it was well worth a fiver. No, there's a second model which is a revision of the hardware, which basically done away with the RCA ports. They're gone, so all you've got now is the AV out, which could take an RF, it can take composite, and it can take... can it take component? No, it doesn't take components. It takes SCART. It takes RGB SCART, which is the best picture you can get out of a PlayStation 1 anyway. So, and it has the parallel port and the serial port. So that's what we're going to call Model B. What we're going to call Model C is basically exactly the same, only they got rid of the parallel port. Now, I have heard tell there is another model that then subsequently got rid of the serial port, large model this is. I've never seen one, and I've seen sort of pictures of them, but I don't know. I'm not going to count it as a different model. So basically Model C is exactly the same as Model B, only with a missing parallel port. Oh, and the other thing with Model B and C is that they have symbols on the buttons rather than the actual words eject and power written on them. They have the power symbol and the eject symbol written on the actual as symbols on the buttons rather than written. Now there is a small version which is actually called a ps1 ONE, which is basically the super slim version of the PlayStation 1. That's it. There is another model out there, which is a black variant, and it is called PlayStation Yarose, YAROSE. And what this is, which is an interesting thing, which is a development unit, and it came with, it basically was 500 quid, and it came with the PlayStation Yarose development unit, and a load of PC software and connectors so that you could develop your own games on your home PC, and plenty of people did. Stuff used to come out on... if you bought official PlayStation magazine at the time, then quite often people's Yarose games used to come on the demo disc. So you'd have demos of actual official stuff that was being released, and then there'd be a couple of homebrew games that people had sent in to be on the cover disc, and some of them were actually quite good. Nothing that would make a full game, but as a novelty item, these are fantastic and extremely sought after now. I don't know, you rarely see them come up. I suspect everyone that wants one actually has one, but if you did want one, you very ever see that come up. But I'm telling you about it anyway. But as far as I'm aware, it doesn't have a massive compatibility with the accessories, so it won't work with like the gun, the light gun, and things like that. As far as I'm aware, I don't own one. I haven't tried, but this is supposedly the thing. It doesn't work with everything. Won't work with your Game Shark and things like that either. So. Yeah, so that's the hardware. Like I say, I don't know where this idea of 30 different variants of a PlayStation 1 comes from. Like I say, I struggled to come up with 5. There is a translucent blue one that I've seen, and I'm not entirely sure what it does, but it seems to be part of an official developer's kit. Probably something similar along the lines of the Yarose console, only I would imagine was given to actual third-party developers. You do see them on occasion as well, but because that's not a consumer unit, I'm not counting that as that is not a variant. If it's not a consumer unit, it is not a variant of the console. It's a development kit. Plain and simple. It's not a consumer unit. It's not available to consumers. Therefore, it is not a variant. Anyway, to the controllers. We have the standard controller, the original controller that came with the PlayStation. Now, this again is another throwback from the Super Nintendo days. How can it not be? I mean, look at the thing. It's like somebody stuck two Super Nintendo pads on top of one another and put handles on the bottom. It's it's a really nice controller. It's perfectly adequate for what it's meant to do, and it is a really nice, really comfortable controller. The next one, which is probably the more common variant now, is the DualShock controller. Now, this features inbuilt rumble and twin analog sticks. Now, bearing in mind, if you've just watched my Nintendo 64 video, you'll know exactly what this is in reply to. This is another fuck you to Nintendo. This is Sony going, anything you can do, we can do better. So they've got two sticks and rumble already built into the controller. This is entirely don't even pretend that this thing wasn't invented just to annoy Nintendo. As soon as Lilac Wars came out with that rumble pack for the N64, this thing was literally out about maybe 2 months later. You know, and it's, yeah, look at our two sticks and our, you know, we've got rumble built into the controller. You need a separate for that. And so there is no way that that's not why it was invented. And it is a really nice controller. Now, when I first got a DualShock controller, I thought it was really, really heavy because I was used to playing with the normal ones. Because I had my PlayStation long enough that I had two first-party Sony controllers. Because I had actually bought a second one, and then when the DualShock came out, I didn't actually like it at first. I thought it was too heavy. I didn't like the rumble. Shows what I know. But there you are. But it grows on you, and it is actually a really nice controller. And especially if you're playing something like Metal Gear, it is a brilliant controller to use for that. Much better than the stock controller. And I'm pretty sure there is a couple of games that actually require a DualShock controller and you can't use the normal one, but I can't think off the top of my head what they are. So I'll probably leave that and, you know, just do the research. There is an arcade stick. It is a massive old beast, because you got to remember the amount of buttons that are actually on a PlayStation controller. Then yeah, it is a massive beast, and it is. It's getting to the point now where arcade sticks are just too big to be able to sit on your lap anymore. You really need to have them on the coffee table by the time the PlayStation's out, because they're just too many buttons. They're too heavy. They do too many things. So there's an arcade stick, and it's not that difficult to get hold of. There's also a PlayStation mouse. I don't know what it's for. I've never used it. I've seen them. There's also a pad that's supposed to come with it, although whether you can ever find it, because whenever you seem to see the PlayStation mice, they're just there. It's just the mouse. There's nothing else with it. But there is a pad that goes with it, with the PlayStation logo on it. So if you can ever find that, brilliant. So that, I think that, oh no, the third-party controllers. This is the last thing I want to talk about, and I am not going to go into all the third-party controllers for this console, because this console just sold in its millions. So, as obviously that means there is just tons and tons and tons of third-party stuff around for it. There's like Mad Catz controllers and things like that, but the proper unique ones seem to be are the Namco controllers, and they just had odd controllers. They had one, I think it was called the Negcon, where it actually twisted in the middle, which was supposedly used for driving. It literally, you know, there was another one that had like a little racing wheel on it. I think it's the JogCon or something like that. Again, another Namco controller. But the one Namco controller you do want is the G-Con, which is the gun. Now, the gun plugs in the front of the PlayStation, but it also plugs in the back through one of the RCA ports. Now, what this means is that you will get much more accuracy with the G-Con gun if you have the first model PlayStation, the one with the RCA ports on it. Obviously, it will still work on the other models, but you will only get the accuracy, and it does actually make a difference. I used to have one of these. I've got rid of it now. I sold it years ago, unfortunately, because they're quite sought after now. And it was bundled with the Time Crisis game, which was very popular in arcades at the time. And incidentally, if you have the G-Con, and obviously an old television, because it still works on the same principles as the older light gun hardware, so you need a CRT television to use it. Unfortunately, can't use it on a modern one. But if you have the G-Con and Time Crisis, you can actually use a second controller, and if you step on the action buttons on the second controller, you can use it like the pedal from the Time Crisis arcade, which a lot of people don't seem to know, but it is quite fun to do that, although you might actually break your controller. But you know, that controllers aren't rare. You know, it's quite nice to pretend you've got the arcade machine in your own house. Now, one accessory you are going to need is a memory card. No, these generally you can get third-party ones, and they are obviously going to be cheaper. The trouble is that, and this is only going to apply to people that play PlayStation 1 stuff on newer consoles. If you think you might be playing stuff on your PlayStation 1, and then at some point you might like to play it on your PlayStation 3, you are definitely better off getting the Sony PlayStation 1 memory cards, because what I've found, because I have an adapter for my PlayStation 3 that I can put PlayStation 1 memory cards into, and every single third-party card that I've got doesn't work. If I want to transfer a game save from my PlayStation 1 to my PlayStation 3, the only time my PlayStation 3 will read the save is if it's a genuine Sony card that it's on. So that is what I will say about that, is that yes, the third-party memory cards are cheap, and if you're not transferring anything from one card to another, they are perfectly functional. But if you're trying to transfer stuff, go for the original Sony ones. They just seem to work with everything. There's even one where I tried it on the PlayStation 3 and it claimed it was reading something, and then it just didn't. It just stayed on the screen and didn't do anything, and the card crashed and all the save data on it was unreadable. So that is the only piece of advice I will give on memory cards, is go for the Sony ones. It will work out more expensive, but if you think you might want to transfer them to something at some point, that's the ones that I've found personally to go for. But yeah, so the Sony memory cards, they basically have 15 blocks. They're 1 megabyte cards. They have 15 blocks for your game saves, which on the face of it sounds fine, because most games only use 1 block. But if you're playing something like Gran Turismo, it will use 5. So that's basically a third of your memory card gone on one game. So you will need a lot of these. The only other solution that I can think of is, yeah, you could get loads of third-party cards and just move them from one place to another using the actual PlayStation 1 console. That seems to work perfectly fine. There is another device which I've seen pictures of, but in real life I've only ever seen one of them, and it was being sold in this is going to show how long ago this was, in Tower Records in London, in Piccadilly Circus. They used to have a big sort of games bit upstairs, and there was this. What it was like a floppy drive, and it plugged into the memory. I don't know what it was called, so I can't. I've tried researching it, and I can't. I can sort of find pictures of it, but no real information. So if anyone knows, please put this in the comments. It was a 3.5 inch floppy drive, and it plugged into the memory card socket of your PlayStation 1, with a pass-through for the controller. And what it basically was is that you could use this floppy drive by using 1.44 megabyte floppies as memory cards, and each floppy disk would give you 15 blocks. Now obviously these would be formatted as PlayStation memory cards, so you probably wouldn't be able to take them out and put them in a PC or whatever, because a PC floppy drive Windows wouldn't be able to read them, unless there was special software that came with it. I don't know, but like I say, I've only ever seen one, and it was in Tower Records in Piccadilly Circus in London. So if you were there when they were selling that, then you might know what it is. You can put in the comments. But there's going to be an awful lot of coincidence for you to actually be watching this video and know what I'm talking about, and maybe have bought one. Because I think at the time they were about 50 quid or something like that, and bearing in mind at the time a PlayStation memory card was about 15, you know, maybe somebody thought of it as a good investment. There is another solution, and this is slightly more convoluted, but there is a device called a DeX drive. And what this basically is, this is a device that plugs into the serial port of a standard PC, and is basically a PlayStation memory card reader. Now, I think the original idea behind this was basically for modifying game saves, but you can use it to back up all your game saves to a PC. And the good thing about this is, as well, is that if you have PlayStation emulators running on your PC, then you can swap the saves back and forward. You can also, you know, modify the saves, as I said, but you can actually just, once you've filled a card, and maybe there's stuff on there that you'd like to keep the saves of, but you don't want to play immediately, you can just back up each save individually using a DeX drive and just keep it on a hard drive somewhere, or upload it to the internet, or whatever was the idea at the time. But these things exist, and this is probably, if you had, say, a couple of hundred games, a DeX drive is probably a better investment than if you had to buy all Sony brand memory cards for a PlayStation 1, to be honest, because you'd only really need to buy one memory card then and one DeX drive, whereas if you had 100 games you might need 40 odd cards, depending on what games they were and how many blocks they took up. So do bear in mind that a DeX drive is a thing that exists, is perfectly functional even in this day and age, because unless you've got one of these micro PCs, your PC will still have a serial port on it somewhere. They haven't altogether done away with 16-bit ports on PCs. Serial port is one that is still there. So yeah, that is a thing. Other accessories, cheat devices. Now, most of these that are actual physical devices, you again need one of the first two models of PlayStation to use. They don't work on the Slim, on the PS1 model. They don't work on the later models of the big PlayStation 1, because you need the parallel port to use most of them, and that is stuff like the Exploder cartridge, the Game Shark, and stuff of that ilk. Now, take care, people in the US. I have mentioned this on a previous video before. I forget which one it was, but I have definitely mentioned this in a previous video. The original version 1, the original version of the Game Shark that was released in the US was really, really buggy, and in some cases, if you had the right Game Shark and the original model console, it could brick the console, because it would basically send unwelcome voltages through the parallel port, and it could potentially brick the console by sending a shock at the wrong voltage straight through the motherboard. So do be careful if you are using a Game Shark in the US, that, you know, if you've bought it from somebody that used it and it was fine, it might be that they had a different model PlayStation to you, or it might be that, you know, it is just fine. But do bear in mind there was this issue with the original Game Sharks, so that's fair warning to you now. But this is only going to apply to people in the US, because in the UK we didn't get Game Sharks until much later, and they had all been revised versions by that point. Now, there are CD versions of these available that work with the later models, that use a memory card rather than a physical device that plugs into the console. But bearing in mind that collectors are really keen on these because they work with all models of the console from the beginning to the end, so therefore they will set you back probably more money than the original cartridge versions. So yeah, how badly do you want to cheat, basically? Now, the other, probably the last accessory I'm going to talk about, and it's only going to be very briefly because I don't care for things like this, there is a VCD adapter, video CD adapter available for the PlayStation, although it is only compatible, as far as I'm aware, it was never re-released for any of the newer versions. It is only compatible with that original model of the console, again that has the RCA jacks on the back. As far as I'm aware, they did not release a VCD adapter for any later iterations of the console, so provided you've got the one with the RCA plugs on the back, you can use a VCD adapter. So again, your anime and porn needs are taken care of with this console. Modding is a big issue with the PlayStation 1. I have owned modded PlayStation 1s in the past, although it was a complete waste of time, really, because the only thing I ever played on it was copied games. I never used it I never had any Japanese games, so I could have probably done that with a disc swap rather than actually getting the console modded, but it's irrelevant now because I sold that console that I had that was modded. I kept my original one. My original one is sort of original, but I have repainted it, which I shouldn't have done, but, you know, when I got it I was like, what, 16 and a moron, so, you know, I thought it looked cooler in black. Yeah, but modding was an issue with this console, and quite a lot of the ones you will find secondhand have, you know, they will have been modded over the years. I mean, I've done mods on PlayStation 1s. Alright, a long while ago, but, you know, it can be done. And reasonably easily, provided you know what you're doing. And the mod chips used to come with schematics to do it. And this is around the time where where mod chips and things like that had started to get really, really, really cheap. So I dare say probably, maybe not half, but maybe 25% of the people that owned a PlayStation 1 had it modded at some point. I don't know, like I say, it did. Not for any particular reason, it just seemed like, well, everyone else is doing it, so, you know, for the price of a new memory card I can get a mod chip instead and I can play loads of copied games, which again I don't have anymore because I basically gave them away in a big case when I sold the modded console, because I didn't have a modded console, so what would I need the copies for? You know, here you are, buy the modded console and I'll give you all this shit. Look, I don't want it, it's taking up space. That was at the point where I was getting rid of a lot of my PlayStation stuff. I don't regret getting rid of the modded console quite so much because, like I say, I had no Japanese or American games to play on it anyway. I do regret getting rid of a lot of my original PlayStation games. It's quite upsetting to think about because I only have about 12, 15 games left. So, upsetting. So, on to the games. Now, Sony managed to take full advantage of all the third-party developers jumping ship from other consoles. Now, we know why they jumped ship from Nintendo. If you watch my N64 video, that's plainly obvious why the third-party developers jumped. Notably, obviously, I mentioned it, Squaresoft, because they just the CD format gave them the opportunity to do massive games. Now, you could have the same argument with stuff from the Sega Saturn, and yes, the Saturn was very popular in Japan, and it was quite popular in Britain. Well, in Europe, but in Britain as well. But you've got to understand as well that the Saturn wasn't exactly that straightforward to program for. It was much easier if you were already making a game for a Saturn. It was much easier to then port that game onto a PlayStation rather than if you're already making a PlayStation game to try and port it to the Saturn. It was easy to do it from Saturn to PlayStation rather than the other way around. So effectively what happened is programmers, even the ones that decided they were going to release on both systems, what they did is they went so far with both of them. And then when they realised that the Saturn wasn't doing well in America, because it always comes down to America, that is, regardless of how you swing it, that is the biggest market for consoles. 250 million people. That is the biggest market for consoles in the world. So if you don't do well in America, you may as well not have bothered, really. And that's it. And when these third-party developers look at it on the size of the thing, the PlayStation was just selling gangbusters above everyone else in the marketplace. So Sony took full advantage of this, and who can blame them? And to a lot of developers, they even offered incentives to this is when you start getting the beginning of exclusivity deals and things like that. Even though Sony arguably didn't really need to, not until much later in its lifetime but you start to get the beginning of these things, and Square basically had exclusivity with Nintendo and jumped ship and signed exclusivity with Sony. That's basically how this works. So like their flagship titles would all end up on the PlayStation, thanks to that original deal that was done here. Although obviously later on, by the time some of the later games come out, that deal had started to, that had gone. But there are so many games on this console as a result, and not all of them good. I'll say that for a kick-off as well. One of the best companies for third-party games is Namco. Now, basically, Namco had Galaxian and Pac-Man and things like that, and then nobody really heard of them for about 15 years, maybe even longer. How long are we talking? So give or take 15 to 20 years. Nobody really thought about Namco, nobody really cared about Namco, and then suddenly, bang, Tekken. Tekken hits the arcades, and it was announced as a PlayStation exclusive. Ridge Racer was another thing that people were looking forward to, but mostly it was Tekken. Now, I said in the Saturn video that people were looking forward to Daytona USA, and yes, they absolutely were. But if you put Daytona USA and Ridge Racer side by side, Daytona is clearly the more superior game. Whereas, by the same token, if you put Virtua Fighter and Tekken side by side, then clearly Tekken is the winner. There's no question of it. So Namco comes back with this massive hit. And bearing in mind, like I said, they were already probably one of Sony's biggest third-party developers at this point, and exclusive developer as well. So they were releasing hardware for the PlayStation, they were releasing software for the PlayStation. They even come up with this gimmick that they would put some of their old games on the CD because part of the issue the PlayStation had was loading times. It was a massive issue, especially when Nintendo 64, their competitor, made this big deal about cartridges not having loading times. That was pretty much the only advantage they had. But for games like Tekken that had so much to load in, these loading games were actually really, really good. But so you could play them as the game was loading. But what was good about them is that if you got really good at them, like if you got a perfect score on, I think it was Gallagher for Tekken, you could unlock special features. You got a special costume for Devil Kazuya. You could play as in a special costume. On Ridge Racer, it would unlock tracks or cars or something like that. If you got the high score on, I forget what was on Ridge Racer. I think, but anyway. But this was all stuff that you hadn't really seen before. It had been done before, but Namco that's what they were known for. You put in this game and you got one of the little arcade games, and you could continue on playing it. You didn't have to, once the thing had loaded, you could either choose to press start and play the game that you'd bought, or you could continue playing the little arcade game, which is, it's just nice. I think it's just, it's not even a selling point. You couldn't sell a game based on that. But the fact that it's there, I think, is just wonderful. You know, it's just one of them things. But so Namco stuff. I mean, most of the Namco stuff is actually pretty good. But beware, if you are going to collect for this console now, is that there is, and this is going to be another one. Like the N64, you can do far worse than to have a really well curated collection for this console. Now, depending on whether you take all the games that were ever released for this console or just the games that were released in whichever territory you happen to be in, you might come up with a number of somewhere between 1,200 and 3,000 games possibly. But obviously when you get to numbers like that, not everything you buy is going to be worth having. This is basically the beginning of, this is the genesis of shovelware. Well, no, I mean the genesis of shovelware was obviously the Atari 2600, but this is where it actually became an issue, because the games would still cost you quite a lot of money at the time, and in fact some of them do now. You would be amazed the amount of stuff that I have seen that is shovelware shit. I mean, honestly, stuff you wouldn't want to play, that people have listed on eBay as rare, and you know, they're trying to sell it for like 10 quid, 15 quid, buy it now. And don't fall for the bullshit. Honestly, to be fair, aside from that, most of the games that you're going to find on this system are expensive because they're good. It's generally the same with a lot of systems from this point onwards. Generally speaking, there aren't really any rarities. There's nothing, because of the way that Sony controlled the licenses, you had to print at least 5,000 copies in a single territory. They were still region locked at the time, so there had to be 5,000 copies made in any territory you wanted to release in. So if you wanted to release in Japan, Europe, and the US, that is at least 15,000 copies of any one game. So nothing on this system is rare. Not from that standpoint. No, there is stuff that is sought after. But generally what this means is that the stuff that is sought after because it is good, not because of its rarity value. Obviously there's stuff that that broke that 5,000 barrier by miles. I mean, there was stuff that there are games that were made in their millions for this console. Something like Final Fantasy VII. I mean, it sold millions. It actually sold more than 1 million copies. So, yeah, but there is no one game in any one territory has less than 5,000 copies. That's just how it works. That was Sony's rules at the time. Now, I dare say that maybe towards the end of the life of the console, maybe that was waived somewhat. I mean, I don't see EA producing whatever the last year it was, FIFA 07 or FIFA 06 or whatever, 5,000 copies of it. Maybe that was waived later on, but by and large, anything you want to play, there's at least 5,000 copies of all of it. So don't take the opinion of somebody trying to sell you it on eBay as rare. There's no, when it comes to PlayStation 1, there's really no such thing. So that's about it. So, I mean, this seems like a really quick video, if I'm honest. Oh, 42 minutes, not that quick. I've obviously rambled on for a lot longer than I think. There's not really much else to say about the PlayStation 1. I mean, obviously, if you've heard of it, you've heard of it, and it's not. This is what I like about this console. There's nothing really overly complex about it. It is what it is. It's a games console. There's no clever features. There's no silly controller variant. All right, there's the analog sticks, but that's only when somebody else decided to do it first. There's no funny controller buttons, there's no setup, there's no difficult to program for chipset, so that makes it easier for third party. It was just, this is it, this is the console, and it was, I think, the cheapest console. I could be slightly wrong, but I think it is the cheapest console. No. So obviously this isn't going to be a void. There is no way. There's probably no way you could avoid this, even if you wanted to. And just for the fact that it is so easy to do, it's definitely at least emulate. So if you don't have one, then don't miss out. Do, because like I say, there was lots of exclusives for this console. Basically because third-party programmers had nowhere else to go really but this console if they wanted to make any serious money. So there were a lot of exclusives. Now, interestingly enough, there is a reasonably rare disc available for the Dreamcast, which is called Bleem. Or the emulator was called Bleem when it was on PC. I think it's called Bleemcast. You can actually emulate a PlayStation on a Dreamcast, interestingly enough. How well this works, I don't know. I've never actually done it, but this is a way that does exist. So if you don't have a PlayStation and you do have a Dreamcast, then you can use this Bleem software on your Dreamcast to emulate PlayStation games. You can put PlayStation games in and just play them on a Dreamcast, so that's quite interesting. But even on a PC, on a Raspberry Pi, the PlayStation works absolutely brilliantly. Yeah, you'll get the odd graphical glitch or whatever, but even on a Raspberry Pi, provided you can fit the games you want on an SD card, you've got absolutely no problem running them at all. I think the only... I'm trying to think if I even... because I've tried running quite a few PlayStation games on my Raspberry Pi, and I'm sure there was one or two that just had sort of issues that they didn't make them unplayable, but they made them unpalatable. But a PC will do it no problem. I mean, pretty much on PCs now, there has been full compatibility with PlayStation games for a very long time. Obviously, if you want to use a light gun, that's not true. But the game runs, is the point. There is full compatibility. The other thing is, if you don't actually want the hardware but you want to play the games, obviously PlayStation 1 games will play on every PlayStation console. I think they play on actually, come to think of it, I'm not sure if they all play on PlayStation 4, but certainly on a PlayStation 2, on a PlayStation 3, PlayStation 1 games play perfectly. And in fact, if you want to get the best picture from a PlayStation 1 game, the PlayStation 3 is probably, I don't think you can do better than playing them on a PlayStation 3. Because honestly, the way it does the scaling and the the stretching of stuff is actually really, really good. I've played Final Fantasy 9 on my PlayStation 3, and it looks, obviously it's not making anything HD, but it actually looks better and cleaner, and is a cleaner, crisper image through a PlayStation 3 than it is from the original PlayStation 1 hardware. So that is always an option as well, if you don't actually want to buy a console. Although, as I've said at some point previous, that, you know, the console is not the expensive part of collecting, it's the games. So but if that was a thing and you really didn't have space for another console, but you might like to try a few PS1 games, you can play them on your PlayStation 2, your PlayStation 3, and possibly your PlayStation 4, although I don't think compatibility is there for all games. So that's it. That's basically how I'm going to end this, is that so what have we had in this entire generation? Did we have one to actually avoid? I don't think we did, all told. So yeah, this has been a really good generation for consoles. Obviously, like I say, the PlayStation 1, there is no question of that. It absolutely won Generation 5. Although it's not a competition, it was then. So there you go. So I think, no, it has been pointed out to me, and not just by people in the comments, it has been pointed out to me by one person in, you know, the real world, that there may be some issues with some of the things I've said, like stuff that I've missed out, basically, that should have been in. There was something I missed out in the Saturn video. I can't remember exactly offhand what it was. I'll have to check, because I did sort of write it down, but I don't have it with me. So I might have to do like a little follow up on the end of Generation 5. Or I might not. It depends how serious I think the thing is. But possibly the next video in this set will be an introduction to Generation 6, and that is possibly going to be the last introduction I'm going to need to do, because after Generation 6 the whole market sort of funnels down and there's not many people left. But I haven't decided yet. I might not do an introduction, because it's already getting to that point where the market has funneled down, and pretty much everyone has gone apart from the names you already know. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. But this is the end of Generation 5. This is the last video of Generation 5, unless I do a little recap one, which will probably only be 5 minutes, if I do decide to do one. So yeah, stay tuned for Generation 6 stuff. And as usual, you know, Twitter, feedback, yada yada yada. If there is anything that you think should have been in this video and wasn't, then please do put that in the comments, because not only do I read them, but other people will then read them, and they will then get the accumulated wisdom of the masses, if you like, and hopefully know more because of it. So I have now banged on for 50 minutes. Actually, this is shorter than the N64 one. I wasn't expecting that. I've banged on for 50 minutes, and that's sort of me done. That's me done with Generation 5, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video I do.